Business as usual is challenged every day. It's not about if disruption occurs, it's when. On this original show from Castellan Solutions, we're hearing from the world's best leaders as they get into specific situations and topics, providing insights, advice, lessons learned, and resources so you can be ready for when business is interrupted. I'm your host, Brian Zawada, for this Scenarios episode. I just wanted to kind of kick it off by maybe, do you have kind of a top 3, top 5 list on what's changed over the last 12 to 18 months when it comes to thinking about resilience?
I think quite a bit has changed, hasn't it? We're talking about it an awful lot, a lot more. In the past, you and I have spoken about this, and I've had these conversations with many other resilience professionals. The challenge has always been, how do you get resilience onto the agenda at executive or board level? Well, now for many organisations, it is the agenda. It's they're in survival mode for in dealing with severe weather or the fallout from COVID, or some of the political instability that we've seen across the globe as well. So the number one change has been the level of interest and scrutiny that is being given to the topic. And that's a positive thing. It probably feels quite uncomfortable for some that may not have had that kind of scrutiny in the past, being asked quite difficult questions by their boards. But I think it should be welcomed. It's a positive change. A couple of other things that I think have drastically changed as well, and will continue to evolve over the next few months and years. I think COVID showed us that the scope and depth of some of our planning needed to be wider and deeper. I think too many plans were focused on recovering discrete bits of infrastructure, an individual building, an individual resource, or weren't really thinking about global emergencies that would last a very long time. I picked up a number of plans recently, and the assumptions list at the beginning of the plan, it specifically writes out the risk of a global event impacting on all office locations or all production locations at once. Well, COVID's proved that to be a false assumption to make. So I think we'll see more scrutiny in the breadth of planning, the scope, and the depth of that planning. Supply chain, I think that's another. We're only just starting to see some changes here, I think, but I think that's going to be we're going to see radical changes in that sort of element of resilience. I wonder whether the just-in-time structures that we have used for many generations now, and have come to rely upon in order to deliver cheap products and services to consumers, I wonder whether that's going to survive in some sectors. For me, just-in-time works very well in an environment that is stable, that is predictable, where you don't need to have huge amounts of inventory on the factory floor for a rainy day. But COVID, climate change effects, the political instability that we've been seeing, I think that potentially challenges it. And we can look actually to what the car industry did in response to the earthquake and tsunami in Japan in 2011. There's quite a nice study there around how they used that as an opportunity to change some of their supply chain management processes to make the organisation resilient. So to recap, it's scope and depth of planning, it's changes in the way that we manage our supply chains, but the positive is we're now being listened to, which is a good thing.
So I'm glad you said the word listen to, because I might have used words similar to that a moment ago, because you started with leadership engagement or leadership interest. How do we meet that interest? How do we meet at their level? What's the practice? What's the skill? What's the method to not only engage once, but engage continuously to keep the momentum on this very important topic? Because I don't think it's going away anytime soon. What's your take? What are you seeing?
I've long felt that business continuity and resilience professionals are good at what they do in a technical sense. But in order to be successful at a more senior level within organisations and properly connect at board level and exec level, there's a whole bunch of softer skills that you need around relationship management, communication, just simply understanding the business and making your technical expertise relevant to the executive. I think the resilience professionals of the future will spend more time honing those skills than they perhaps have in the past. And in that they've been focused more on the technical skills. We'll always need those technical skills, sure. But it's almost a given that you know how to write a business continuity plan, you know how to run an exercise. But the next step on from that is making that relevant to senior leadership. And one of the big things I'm seeing in kind of client conversations I've been having in the role that I'm sitting in at the moment is more interest from senior leaders in scenario analysis and risk quantification. So they've got this risk radar of 101 different things that could happen to the organisation tomorrow or in next week or in a few years. Where do they need to prioritise? And that's a skill set I think that some of the more traditional business continuity practitioners need to learn. But having that skill set is going to be hugely valuable, because you can then have a conversation at exec level about where to invest in protecting the organisation, balanced against the likelihood of risk and the impact of risk. It challenges some of the core concepts of business continuity, but I think for good reason.
It's interesting you mentioned some of those skills: business acumen, communications. Some of the others that I think build upon that or complement it, I've heard over and over again, is I would love our business continuity, our resilience professionals to be more conceptual, to imagine different situations, to imagine different ways in which that they can coach the business on being able to operate a little bit differently until returning to normal. That was another one. Another one that's come up quite a bit is being tenacious, being really driven to being able to, don't accept a bad answer. Don't accept an incomplete answer. Drive us towards a solution, and get us better and better over time. In other words, don't be passive. And those are a couple that I've heard recently in more of my exec conversations, the ask: be more conceptual, be more tenacious. And I think it complements everything that you just said.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And it links back to there's going to be greater scrutiny over the quality of our recovery and resilience arrangements. Therefore, when you stand up in front of the exec or the board, you need to be able to demonstrate that you're delivering quality insights and useful assurance over the effectiveness of plans. One of the things we need to get better at is in harnessing our imagination in a more effective way to develop more robust, more rigorous, more testing scenario exercises. How many times have you and I have been in an exercise, some of which I'm sure we've written ourselves, that get to the point where the fire is out and then everybody goes home? They don't really talk about the recovery process, which in COVID is going to be months, if not years. We never really get to that stage. So I think some of our exercises in the past, COVID is proven to us that they have been a little bit too superficial.
Yeah, absolutely. In talking about scenarios for a moment, there's a lot of interesting and some new practice regarding severe yet plausible scenarios. And we're seeing that brought up a lot in financial services. And the reason I think it's valuable is it makes the concept of disruption real in the minds of executives. It gives them something to say, so you're telling me that's what we're working on. We're working to protect ourselves against a situation like that. And certainly COVID, gives something very concrete. Supply chain disruptions, very concrete. But building that library of those severe yet plausible scenarios, something that we can eventually test against, measure against, it makes it real. That's what I'm hearing over and over again. Are you hearing the same?
Yeah, I would go further and say that what that concept allows us to do is move to a point where we can help executives assume that failure is going to happen. We don't know. Business continuity professionals have always said you don't worry about the likelihood, you worry about the impact, and you manage the impact. Well, in having that conversation, in my experience at senior level, they always come back to, but what will happen? What will cause that impact? Talk me through the scenario. And actually, if you've got those severe, or in some cases extreme but plausible scenarios, you can use that to paint quite an interesting picture that gives them a sense of a very bad day in the office that they want to to avoid. And it, as you say, it really helps them to conceptualise what the effects of a crisis might look like on their organisation and on them as individuals.
The idea of working to prevent versus being really good at responding and recovering, has the prevent expectation increased, or is it the same? Is it less? What are you seeing on that?
Particularly in organisations that are delivering some kind of production environment. And I think in those industries, it's easier to some degree to conceptualise what the effect of a disruption would be on their value chain, on their production process. And you're right. You do the analysis of what needs to be recovered, when it needs to be recovered, and at that point, it's useful to then go back to the beginning and say, well, what could we do in advance of a disruption to actually engineer some of that disruption risk out of the system? And in a production environment, that could be holding stock in numerous different locations around the globe, having another production line that can be retasked to produce whatever it is that's being produced in another location, having reciprocal arrangements with other producers to step in to support you. Now, some people would consider that traditional business continuity and resilience. Others would consider that part of the business planning process. But actually, resilience professionals have an opportunity and a skill set that helps them deliver or achieve that opportunity to actually help re-engineer an organisation to make them more resilient. So I think we have a role to play, not just downstream of a disruption, but also upstream of it, so to speak.
Certainly. So I mentioned I was going to ask a little bit about, or I was going to talk a little bit about and get your perspective on kind of some of the emerging expectations, particularly regulatory requirements and the like, financial services coming out of the Bank of England as an example, the new policy paper on operational resilience. I'm sure that's top of mind every day for you. It certainly is for me as well. And for many, it's introduces some thoughts and ideas, or maybe reinforces some concepts that are valuable for any sector. But what's your perspective on this? Is there anything that stands out, either net new or reinforces something that's incredibly valuable that we all should be taking into account?
Firstly, I think it's a welcome step forward, particularly for the financial services industry. In my view, some of what the Bank of England and the PRA and FCA are calling for, other industries are already delivering, and have been for many years. You take a car manufacturer, they have a very good understanding of what their end-to-end process is to get that finished car to their consumers. And resilience, some of the concepts of operational resilience have been applied throughout that production process for many years. It's a big step forward, though, because it elevates the discussion on resilience to what I would describe as the value chain level. Looking at those business services that cut across the organisation. For too long, and as I alluded to this earlier when I talked about the scope of business continuity plans, I think for too long in a lot of organisations, the focus of planning has been limited to individual locations, individual resources, and they haven't really looked at how the whole system works together to deliver an outcome to a customer at the end of that value chain process. So I think focusing on that value chain is hugely beneficial. I personally don't think a lot of what is being asked of banks in particular is particularly new. It's really an extension of a lot of work that is already happening, either under business continuity or operational risk. It's applying some of the tools that those banks have used for many years in a slightly different way. So it is a little bit foreign. The big difference, though, is encouraging staff to think beyond a bad day in the office, and think about scenarios that would lead to catastrophic and material impact, either to consumers or market stability. I've noticed it takes a little while for colleagues in banks to get to a point where they're comfortable talking about those kind of outcomes, because they don't ever want to see it happen. They always want to. They talk about the recovery time being well within that what the Bank of England calls impact tolerance, which is the point at which things get really bad. So it takes a while to warm them up, but once they're there, it's an enormously useful vehicle to stress test the organisation against.
It's interesting to me when I compare our work, in ISO to some of these concepts. The idea of business services, you might argue, is close to or maybe similar to products and services. Those words were in ISO 22301 since, 2012. Yet people are looking at these as kind of saying it's a little bit new to them. What's the difference in your mind? Or is this just a reinforcement or something, just really kind of zeroing in on what's important rather than, as you said, kind of in the weeds, kind of activities and assets? It's moving it up, up. It's just, so what's your take on it? Is there something new there, or is it a reinforcement of what we saw with 22301?
Yeah, I don't think it's drastically new. I think a lot of the concepts and principles that sit within the operational resilience policy can be found between the lines in the ISO documentation. Not necessarily specifically referenced, but it's there. But this is more about how you apply it. At ISO, we don't talk about or give detailed guidance about how you deliver the intent of the standard. So what the regulator has done here in the UK on for financial institutions is to talk more about the how, effectively, and even then they're kind of relatively light touch in providing that kind of direction and guidance. So I think they complement each other. I don't think operational resilience is drastically new. The one thing that it in my view does do differently perhaps is make it clear that you assume that disruption will happen, and therefore we need to plan accordingly. It puts greater emphasis on that incident and crisis response and communication with customers, and it puts an onus on thinking about going beyond the recovery time that you would normally accept in order to bring back business activity. So that impact tolerance is going further beyond your recovery time objectives, say, that you typically set.
And one of the other things I think that stands out to me is that even though we've talked about how reputation impairment has an impact or has an influence on setting business continuity requirements, I think this new set of expectations really drives home the pain on the customer and the impact on the market. And I think that's an important consideration as well. And that's one I think will certainly, I think be long lasting in our profession, is being a little bit more like you said, outside the organization, and not just within the four walls of a building for sure. Even extending past the supply chain, that end-to-end value chain now is multiple suppliers deep all the way to the customer and how we reach the customer. And I think that's pretty profound, and I think that's an important evolution as well.
Yeah. There are no pitfalls, I think, that are easy to fall down in implementing operational resilience. Delivering the planning at the business service level requires some degree of mapping of those business services. And I've seen that delivered at various different levels of detail, from something that is relatively high level but delivers just enough in order to get to the next stage of the process, through to something that has, taken an army of consultants, an awful lot of time, effort, and costed the client a significant amount of money, but in my view probably doesn't necessarily give them much more benefit than having just got a reasonable understanding of those mapping processes. There's a potential to get lost in the detail very quickly, and really the approach that I've been taking with clients is to deliver enough to get to the point where we understand criticality to the level of detail that we need in order to get to the next stage. Any more than that, you could argue is wasted effort.
Perhaps over time, adding details that help you identify or expose what may be commonly known or previously known as hidden cracks, vulnerabilities, places where you might be single-threaded. Over time, exposing those and being able to prioritize those, as you said, through some risk quantification efforts. I think this is where a lot of these kind of new practices, combined with some of the regulatory guidance and, kind of the boots on the ground experiences that, we're all developing now, where it all kind of crosses. And I think that's important, and it goes back to what I said before. I think probably one of the most common expectations I've been hearing from executives is help me figure out how to prevent, and prevention oftentimes starts with knowing where your vulnerabilities are, especially in a prioritized manner.
Absolutely.
So let me ask you one more question, and then we'll conclude today. But we talked about some of the skills necessary for the resilience or the business continuity professional going forward. Any other advice that you'd give, in terms of what you're seeing working, what you're seeing not working? Anything you want to conclude with, advice, somebody maybe maybe they're new, or maybe they've been around for a few years, but, now they're growing up into a kind of a new normal?
I think for me, if I was new to this topic, or looking to sort of expand my understanding of the topic and embed myself within a business more effectively, I'd be reaching out to people in operational risk, people in other sort of risk management disciplines across the business, to see what we can learn from them. I think for too long we've built artificial barriers between some of those functions and some of those disciplines, but certainly what I've learned in the work I've delivered with financial institutions on operational resilience is that those barriers are entirely unhelpful in delivering a consistent and aggregated approach to resilience. So that might need a little bit of pride swallowing, but pick up the phone to your colleagues in risk and see what they can offer to the process. Second thing is, if you're as many are in a business continuity role that is relatively traditional in its focus, but you want to break out of that and start talking about the strategic kind of play that resilience can support with at the group level, really you're not going to get to that stage unless you try, unless you take risks. Find opportunities to talk to senior people about their resilience concerns. Find opportunities to talk about severe and plausible scenarios. Run an exercise at a senior level that might, put you under pressure personally, because it raises your profile, makes things a little bit more high risk for you if things go wrong. But look, if you don't do that, you're never going to get out of the of the broom cupboard if you are stuck in the broom cupboard writing those business continuity plans.
No, that's great. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. And James, thank you so much for joining me today on Business Interrupted. I really do appreciate your insights, and I know everyone listening does as well. If someone wanted to reach out to follow up with you directly, what's the best way for them to reach you?
So reach me on my email probably. So that's james.crask@marsh.com.
Thanks for listening to Business Interrupted. I'm Brian Zawada for this scenario's episode. To get more insights and resources, head over to castellanbc.com and follow along wherever you get your audio.